Welcome to the Altered Call podcast. For the next couple of weeks, I'll be sharing a series of interviews that I participated in for the New Path, New You podcast. Ron is a good friend of mine, and I hope that you enjoy our discussion. During this short break in new material, start defining unique minimum standards for your discipleship path, build an authentic relationship with God, and start listening for His voice. We will have a lot to talk about when I get back. Enjoy.
Are churches failing men? Today we're going to ask the tough questions. Why do so many men feel disconnected, unchallenged, and uninspired in their faith? It's not that churches aren't trying. It's that men are craving something deeper, something bolder. That's why we started the Warrior's Path. It's a group built to call men into action, accountability, and spiritual leadership. If you've ever felt like there's more to life than just sitting in the pew, this is your invitation to step onto the path of a warrior. Let's get to it.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Welcome to the New Path, New You. My name is Ron Cool. Thank you so much for joining today. And as you listened on the last podcast, I talked a little bit about the Warrior's Path. So I figured today would be an amazing time to bring a very good friend of mine. And he's actually the brainchild around the Warrior Path. And I've learned a ton from him. So please help me welcome Alex P. And I'm not going to even try to say his last name. What is it?
Pillischafske.
Okay, that is it. So Alex.
It's insanely phonetic.
Yes,
It's just,
it is. It is.
You see it and your brain explodes. That's the problem.
There's a lot of letters.
Yeah, a lot of letters.
A lot of letters. But thank you for hopping on the show. And I'm just excited for everyone to get to know you a little bit. So why don't you take a couple seconds, tell them a little bit about you. And I know you have a new show that's launching, in a couple weeks. So maybe you could give a little insight on that as well.
Yeah, so you and I have been working together and putting together a podcast, which has been a lot of work. Thank you for all of that. Thank you for the work.
You're welcome.
So my background is interesting. I grew up in a house that really wasn't Christian at all. Mm-hmm. So we went whenever it was convenient, but not anything more than that. And somewhere between Christmas and Easter and, once or twice a month.
Sure.
But kind of found Christianity in my teens. At that point, kind of because of the general distaste that I had had for church growing up, it didn't make sense to me the way that people were doing it.
Right.
So I basically spent my entire life since then. I converted right before I was 18, trying to figure out a way to live a Christian life that actually made sense and wasn't just a big pile of hypocrisy all the time. So that's kind of where these ideas come from and kind of my Christian history. I started off much more on the experiential side and less on the technical side. I didn't go to seminary or any of that stuff. And honestly, it was a couple of years before I started reading the Bible in any intense or meaningful way. But lots and lots of prayer, lots and lots of time with God, lots and lots of trying to figure out what makes intuitive sense in all of this versus just kind of the platitudes and the rules that they would teach you otherwise, because those never did anything for me.
No, not at all. And what I love about you is you can break that down to help other men be able to kind of follow a path or follow a track to make them what God's called them to be.
Yeah, and ultimately, if it's not practical, you're not going to do it. What I've been trying to do in converting this process into something that someone else could use, because I've been doing it in my own life for years now, is just try and streamline it as much as possible. Try and make it as intuitive as it can possibly be. And it's still complicated. You're still going to have to put time and energy into it. But I think the payoff is there. And I think it just leads to a better, more holistic life, which I think Christians deserve, in all honesty.
Yeah. No, and you're 100% right. So we're gonna have 3 shows, kind of week to week to week. And so this show, we're just going to really focus on kind of how the whole idea of the Warrior Path started, where you got some of the idea, and then we'll talk more about it in detail over the next couple shows. So it's like a 3-part series we're going to do.
Except
All right, fantastic. So let's go back to, you were doing what you thought you needed to do, as a Christian, but not going to church. And then you were introduced to some things. Talk about that moment where this became real to you.
I stepped away from the church pretty aggressively. So my dad died when I was 12.
Mm-hmm.
And given that I didn't have much faith before that, I wasn't really inclined to turn to God after that.
Right.
I just ignored Christianity altogether from that point. Then again, around the age of 17, 18, I was dating a girl who went to church. So
Right.
as
Right.
you do,
Right.
I decided that I would tag along with her.
Right.
And God, like, I give God a lot of credit for just breaking my doors down. Like,
Right.
it was not something that I had any interest in at all. He just said, no, we're going to do this now. And I like to say that, I was sitting in service and he just hit me with a 2x4. Like,
Mm-hmm.
he just broke down all of my walls and said, no, like, you need to be doing this. And so I said, oh, okay. Like, I guess
Right.
we're doing this now. I knew what I didn't like about Christianity because I'd observed a lot from being tangential to the church for so long that I didn't like. The show up on Sunday, but on Monday, you're just the same as everybody else. That never made sense to me. If religion is meant to be a transformative thing, why are we not being transformed?
Right.
And so then I just went on a personal crusade of trying to figure out what transformation even looked like, and then trying to implement it in my own life because I was unwilling to be a Christian by the standard of, we'll just go to church on Sunday.
Yeah.
Like, if we're going to do this thing, we're going to do it to the best of our ability. We're not just going to show up and sing a couple songs and go home and everything's great.
Right.
So I had to think about what it actually means to commit your life to God, because there's a difference between saying I believe these things and actually living a life that demonstrates that those are the types of things that you believe. So
That's good.
Authenticity has just always been a big piece for me. And if I'm going to say that something is a part of my identity, like Christianity is, then it needs to be something that I can reflect authentically in the world. And so I just went on a crusade searching for that.
I think there's a lot of stuff that we can unpack there, but knowing you how I know you, like, you are an amazing person at understanding what God's telling you to do and then setting boundaries to protect that. And I know we'll talk about that more later, but I think this is kind of pivotal to like this journey, right? So as you were like, okay, God smacked me across the face, I need to start, leaning in, right? Then how long before did you, from that moment, before you got involved in these huddles type situation?
Oof, that was a long time. So that was probably 15 years.
Okay. Wow. Okay.
So I would say that in the beginning, the things that were most important to me were a genuine relationship with God and lots of prayer. Prayer has always been my default kind of spiritual love language. So
Okay.
talking to God really authentically is something that I did from the beginning.
Okay.
It wasn't until I started participating in the huddle process, which, like I said, was probably 10 to 15 years later, that I found out that God could speak back to me in a way that I could respond to.
Yeah.
I just always kind of assumed that I talked to him, silence on the other side. Nobody ever taught me that hearing God is something that I could even do, but talking to him always made intuitive sense to me. So I did a lot of that out the gate. And in college, so I graduated high school, went to college as a baby Christian.
Right.
And honestly, I think that without the prayer group there, which was full of people who were, I think, authentic Christians, like just struggling really hard to figure out what God was and how we how we pursue him in life,
Yeah.
I think that I probably just would have given up on the whole thing.
Mm.
But I met those types of people who are willing to say, look, I don't know how this goes,
Right.
but I'm going to try really hard to figure it out.
Right.
Which was really encouraging to me at that stage of development.
Well, and I think God puts people in your life at the exact right times for exactly what you need. But sometimes we're just so busy and we blow past these things because we're not paying attention.
Yeah.
So if you were busy, you said you were in college. So if you're busy partying and doing all this other stuff, you probably wouldn't have paid attention.
Yeah.
So now you're baby Christian, you're getting involved, you got these things. How long after that did you get married? Because I know that was another pivotal part of
I'll say these are trick questions.
I know.
So it was about 10 years later.
Okay.
About 10 years later that we got married.
Okay. And at that point, you were still chasing God, Sarah chasing God simultaneously. Was there a difference? Did she lead more? Did you lead more? How did that dynamic work?
It's been interesting because I've always pursued God at a personal level very aggressively.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think it was until my son was born that I took stewardship over the home really seriously.
Let's talk about that.
Like I wanted to, like, there were several aspects of our marriage early on that I think I got right, but I credit God fully for our marriage. Like I was not smart enough to pick Sarah out of a lineup. Like he did that.
She's a great person. She is a great person.
Yeah. I was not smart enough for that to work. I do think that he pointed me to a lot of things at that time that kind of led me down the eventual path of stewardship towards the home. But I remember early in our marriage, it kind of was, and this is partially because I traveled a lot, just kind of two separate people living in the same house. And given that it was just the two of us, that wasn't so bad.
Right.
But it kind of, because we waited about 7 years to have kids. Because we waited so long to have kids, we kind of it didn't necessitate us growing up in that way early on, because we could just be two separate entities.
Right.
I mean, we had common goals and focus and all of that, but if she said, "Hey, I'm just not going to be here on Saturday because I have whatever," I'd be like, "Okay, great." It just didn't matter.
Right.
So as far as spirituality goes, I largely just focused on myself, and I think that she largely focused on herself. Okay. She ended up converting away from Catholicism around the time that her and I started dating. So she had a lot of kind of spiritual reworking to do in that time period as well. And so I think that we kind of worked on it separately for several years before we brought any of it together in any meaningful way.
All right. And then we'll fast forward to kind of you and I meeting. Like we met at church, and there was another guy that looked like you as well. Do you remember this conversation?
No. I remember this conversation. I have no concept of who you're talking about.
Here's what's crazy. I don't even know who I'm talking about. Okay. But however, I know there was one day that you couldn't have been in two places at one time.
That is generally how that works,
right?
Yes.
But I've never seen that person. Like I've been to that church, I used to go to that church for 7 years, and it happened one time. And so it was just super weird. Anyway, so you started coming to church. I'll let you kind of take the story from there.
I am going to take a step back because I think it's important kind of to discuss how I got to the church and how you and I met.
Yeah, that's great.
You talked about the huddle process, which had happened years prior at that point. So after college, I got into volunteering a lot, mostly with kids, because that's just kind of my specialty.
Right.
I've been doing it for a really long time.
Right.
And I was part of this group that had a monthly get together for the leaders. And the leaders would get together and basically share what's going on in their life. And I remember thinking at the time that was the healthiest thing I had ever participated in. And that group is kind of where I was given permission to hear God speak into my life in a meaningful way for the first time. And maybe a year or two after I was given that permission, I was given a very specific message. Basically said, build men.
Right.
Just 2 words, build men.
Right.
And I said, well, that's stupid because I'm pretty sure you mean kids. Like
Right.
you're talking about kids, right? Because I've worked
Right.
with kids
Boy,
for 20 years now.
Right.
Men, like I don't even know any men, let alone have any interest in building them up in any particular way. And what was funny is that church did not have a men's ministry at all.
Interesting.
This group was just an offshoot of the volunteer group for the youth.
Right.
They didn't have an actual men's ministry, so like I have no idea what to do with this feedback. I was convinced that it was a message from God, but I had no idea what to do with it. And then fast forward several years later, I end up at the church that you and I met at, and I was there the first Sunday, and they said, "Hey, on Thursday we've got our men's ministry meeting up." I'm like, "All right, I guess I'm doing that." Like, because I'd had it in the back of my head for years, like, I don't know what this is,
Right.
but obviously this is something that I'm meant to participate in.
Right.
And so I show up the first night, and probably you were one of the first people that I spoke to. And apparently the rule was, if you make the mistake of showing up early, you're on the team and you got to set up chairs.
Yes.
So night one, you just look at me and be like, "Hey, you're on the team now." And I go, "Oh, okay, great."
That's how I started.
Yeah, I know. So, and that's how we started everyone else later on. Like, if you show up early, we're going to put you to work. And
Right.
That's great. But I'm like, okay, well, step 1 accomplished. I'm part of a men's group, and apparently I'm on the volunteer team at this point.
Right.
So yeah, that's kind of what got me in the door, because I think without that prompting from God, I wouldn't even have pretended to attend that meeting. I don't think I would have gone at all.
Sure.
Because that's not the type of thing that generally appeals to me.
No, and that's interesting because that's my story as well. Like, I didn't want to go to the one I went to. I remember coming home telling Rachel, saying, "Hey, I'm not going back. I am not like any of those guys.
Yeah.
Not a single one of those guys are like me." And she goes, "Cool, go next time." I was like, "Awesome." And since God's hilarious,
Who's like that?
yeah, exactly. I show up an hour early, and
Yeah.
they're like, "What are you doing?" I go, "Where's everyone at?" They're like, "You're like an hour early." I was like, "Oh, I didn't know." They're like, "Well, you want to help set up?" "Sure." Then I tried to walk away. They're like, "No, you're on the team." I was like, "I didn't know." Okay. And then fast forward, all of a sudden I'm leading this thing because, I didn't leave for 2 years. So it was a little bit crazy. But anyway, so you lean into what God's called you to do. You're now in a situation where you have the opportunity to build men.
Mhm.
Then at that same time, church is starting to pull back the offerings for men.
Right.
I know we've talked about this a lot offline, but I want to kind of talk about that. You had a very specific goal. If something went away, you were going to introduce something.
Yeah. So the structure of the night was kind of a general Sunday service, but then we'd kick the guys out to tables where they would discuss in small groups what was happening in their lives.
Right.
And because of my experience leading small groups from all the children's ministry and things like that, I have done quite a lot of that. You guys had assigned me to be in charge of training people up to lead those tables, because as easy as it sounds to say, we'll just have a discussion amongst yourselves.
Right.
If no one takes the lead, even in a relatively simple way, those conversations are going to go nowhere. Or it's just going to be, how did whatever sports team do?
Right.
Will not be productive with no structure to it whatsoever. So
Correct.
My goal was just to put the smallest amount of structure to those conversations so the guys would actually have productive conversations.
Right.
And so from my perspective, that was the most impactful part of the night, because that's the part where guys could share what was actually happening in real life,
Right.
not in theory or like the Bible says, blah, 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 whatever. This was the practical here's what's happening in my life. Here's what I'm struggling with, and I need you guys to pray for me, or whatever, or speak into my life, or whatever the particular method was.
Sure.
And so I told myself, because you and I being on the leadership team at that point, we saw this thing falling apart long before the pullback actually happened. Like, we knew something was coming, but we didn't know what. And so I just told him, like, I was not involved in those high level conversations, so I didn't know any of the details. But I told myself, if they decide, in whatever form this thing takes in the future, if they decide to cut the tables, what I want to do is pitch this huddle process that I was a part of previously. Because I think that there is a need for that level of vulnerability amongst men.
Yes.
And so I just told myself, at that point I couldn't speak into what was happening, but I said, if they ever make this change, I'm immediately going to pitch this idea. And I just handed it off to God. I'm like, God, if you want me to speak up, these are the conditions that I'm going to do it under. And then I waited. Like, it was probably 4 or 5 months later before they actually pulled the trigger on making the change. But that was my line. I told God, like, if you want me to speak up, I'm going to pitch this idea under this exact circumstance.
And it was interesting because you pitched that, and I wasn't in the room to hear the pitch at all.
Correct. We wanted you in the room. You were
it was supposed to be. It was supposed to be me, but I was stuck in another meeting I couldn't get out of. That wasn't supposed to be taking place. But I just feel that was God orchestrating you an audience with the pastor of that church to pitch the idea.
Yeah, because I'm not sure that would have happened another way.
He said no.
That's what you said. That's not what he said in the moment, but I understand. I understand that feedback now.
Right.
But I pitched this huddle process because, well, they decided that what they wanted to do was get rid of the large group and replace it with something that they wanted to call discipleship.
Correct.
And I think the correct observation that they made was that the meetings that we were having were giving the illusion of discipleship 100%. And not real discipleship. And I think that is
true statement.
A tremendous observation.
Yep.
But the problem is, and this disgusts me so much with church in general, not just the one that we were putting this group together for, is that you say you want discipleship, but then nobody has any idea what that means.
Right.
And that just offends me so much. And so I knew from my own experience that this style of group could lead to that.
Right.
And it wasn't designed specifically for that, but I knew that it could be reworked in such a way that discipleship would be one of the byproducts if we approached it with a level of intentionality.
Right.
And so I pitched that idea. Apparently I was told no.
Right.
And then you decided we were doing it anyway. So that's
well, because even, God told you to build men, and God told me to help men become spiritual leaders. So it made sense to me. Yeah. Right. So I didn't even need to know the entire process. I could just tell your passion when you explained it to me, and God's like, do that. So I try my best to listen to God about everything I can, no matter how crazy it seems like the step is. He literally said, do that. We did it.
I'm well aware of your craziness now.
Right.
At the time, it felt like an absolutely insane idea because I just pitched something knowing full well that you could not have understood what I said without having done it.
Right.
And then you're like, oh, we'll just do that. Okay.
Right.
And so, so then I just spent a lot of time building out the program, and obviously it went through many different iterations over time, but I wanted it to be something that was practical and engaging for men, because I think that I'm not going to say that there aren't people that are attracted to a Bible study, but I think that a lot of guys view a Bible study as a waste of time because it doesn't have a strict practical application to what it is that they are trying to achieve in the world. I participated in, I think, 2 groups where we just read through a book, and I'm like, I'm capable of reading through a book on my own. Like, this is not.
Yeah.
But I think men do respond to. They do respond well to discipleship, and they also respond to practicality. Like,
Right.
if you can show that something will have an impact on their day-to-day life, I think
Right.
most men want that.
And that's what we saw. We literally saw it over and over and over again. And I know our time's almost up for this episode, and we'll get into literally seeing it and kind of the next steps in the next couple episodes. But let's leave this episode with one takeaway teaser for the next episode, that you saw a guy transform from one thing to another just through this process.
So it was interesting because what ended up happening is not what we thought would happen. We thought that men would be inherently attracted to the discipleship part of the process. And that's obviously what we were trying to execute on. What ended up happening is we ended up with a lot of men who were in really rough shape.
Right.
Like they had some real life problems.
Yeah.
That needed to be actively addressed. And that group gave them a place where they could be vulnerable and they could make life-changing process. And this applied to me too. I mean, this group has been a tremendous blessing in my own life and development, just having the accountability and having to look at guys and go, I'm doing this too.
Same.
We had a lot of guys that really needed it. And I think we were in that first group in particular. I think we were in the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
Those guys needed help.
Yeah. For all of us. I mean, it's very interesting because, and we've talked about this so much, where there was no reason for guys to feel like they could be that vulnerable. Like, it's not like we all hung out outside of church. And some of the people, I remember people coming the very first time and just opening up on stuff. And, they would leave and we'd have our little conversation after. And we're like, wow, that was super deep. And he literally, that's his first time he came.
Yeah. And I think there's something to be said of, I'm not going to say that was entirely random, because I did spend a lot of time and energy curating that space so that it could be the type of thing where men would feel comfortable being vulnerable. But yeah, the fact that people were willing to show up night one and just go all in with, here's everything that's ever happened in my life, and here's what I'm struggling with currently. You're like, oh, okay. Right. I didn't know we were doing this right now.
Right.
I thought that maybe you'd give us a general overview of your life. No, here's like the muck that I'm in right now.
Yeah.
Let's just dive right into it.
Yeah. And you're really good at helping guys walk through that and get to the actual thing. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. But Alex, thank you so much for joining me today. Anybody that wants to connect with you, all of your information is going to be in the show notes so they can connect. If you want to know more about the Warrior Path, there's a link in the show notes as well, and you can connect and learn about that. We can't wait to see how that's going to affect you on your new path for New You. See you next week.